back. Thanks so much. So Laura doesn't need introduction in this audience, but I wanted to, congratulate her here for her new appointment as chief economist of Inter-American Development Bank, and also to mention that she's a perfect fit for the keynote of this inaugural event. Not only because she's going to speak to one of the topics of the day in the international trade literature, but because really her entire production, you probably covered everything under international, from capital flows, FDIs, trade. So, and she's also the co-editor of the special issue associated to this conference and an editor of JA. So without further ado, please.
To the organizers, is this working? Really appreciate it. I'm still not, I start IDB June 1st, so I'm still a civilian, which means I can still express my views. But it did this give me the opportunity to start dealing with what will come, and so it will be some years with my Alfaro. Boy, is there humidity in DC. So this is joint work with Harold, Jan, and Gede. So we have been working on this for a while. Comments welcome and appreciated. You're going to see why this has taken a little bit of some time. So there's a renewed interest on the effects of trade policy and restrictions and industrial policy. I don't need to motivate this. In particular, in strategic sectors and the effects on global value chains. So in particular, there's a lot of interest on what is called critical minerals, and depending on the agency that you talk to, they define them a little bit different. But if we zoom a little bit, a lot of that is also related to rare earth minerals, and I'll go into that also in detail, because they are important not only in the green transition, but they are also play an important role in many national security goods, defense, so on and so forth. There has been a lot of discussion on restrictions. So a couple of years ago, there was the restriction on gallium and germanium. Previously, which is the case that we're going to exploit, there was a big restriction in 2010. But now, as we know, there is just like restrictions on rare earth and ND magnets from China, part of this wave of trade restrictions. And so what we argue in this paper, that in a very complex world of global value chains where things are produced in one place and sent to another, the effects of industrial policy are hard to predict, and they can be complex in many ways. And so that is what we want to study in this paper. So we want to look at the effects of trade and industrial policy in critical resources in this brave new world where we still live of global value chains. So rare earths, in case you're like me, that the last chemistry you took was in high school, because in Costa Rica you go directly to your field, so in economics you don't get a lot of chemistry, are 17 elements in the periodic table, lanthanins, and I'll get into how most of them have some Greek name, yttrium and scandium. These two are derived from Sweden, where many were found. They're actually not rare geologically, despite their name. They're just very expensive to mine for many reasons. We argue they are worth studying a little bit differently from other resources for 4 key reasons. First, they have strategic use, but in many ways, a lot of the uses are in the frontier of knowledge. As I said, they're used in the green transformation, medicine, military. When you start working on this, you start getting obsessed with permanent magnets. I didn't know those things existed. I didn't know they're like so important, and they're everywhere. Like now I'm like everything that I have at home, I let it fall just to open up, just to see if it has magnets. But they're also part of electric motors, EVs, turbines. They're also used in catalysts. Again, they tend to be in many critical uses. They have also this feature that you tend to use very small quantities, but they're very hard to substitute. There are additional features that we argue make them very interesting and susceptible to policy intervention. They're very inelastic in the short run, and I'm going to explain why they're so inelastic in the short run. And basically, China has quasi-monopoly, in particular in processing. So because of these characteristics, we argued that they're worth studying in a different, on their own. So the big picture, as I said, is that there can be spillover effects from policy, but also because of these characteristics, strong incentives to innovate, which might affect also the effect of policy. And so just to give you a preview of findings, we're going to exploit an event in 2010 where China restricted rare earths. And what we find is that what this did is actually increase downstream industries abroad, so industries that use rare earths. And we're going to present evidence that this happened in terms of innovation, productivity, and output. So how on earth do we go about doing this? And this is the part of this paper that has many steps and has taken a while. So the first thing we needed to do is construct an input-output table of rare earths. This is not readily available. If you use BEA data, that is, to the best of my knowledge, one of the most detailed. It is very hard to isolate each one of the elements. Even trade data, there's a moment that they're a little bit aggregated. I think this is just people who are going to do this in 10 years. I think even in HS codes, they're going to get their own HS codes, the same way we can find very weird things in textiles in HS codes. Again, HS codes are the outcome of political economy, if you want. But right now, some of them are very aggregated. So we use geological reports and different reports and market price data to come up with this input-output. Then we also had to classify patents that use rare earths, and for this we use language models, ChatGPT, to help us classify patents that use rare earths, but also patents that enhance the use of rare earths and make it more efficient. We exploit the event in 2010 when China, for different reasons, restricted the exports of rare earths outside China, and we look at the effects that this policy have downstream. And in particular, as I said, we found that there were positive effects in terms of actual exports outside of China and innovation and productivity. And then to rationalize all of this, we use a directed technical change model with downstream sectors. So we build this quantitative model that will have trade, I/O linkages, and directed technical change. We use this model to create estimates of innovation, and I'll explain why and how. And we find evidence that is consistent with the empirical findings. So there is a lot of literature that is related to this: industrial policy, supply chains, sanctions, geoeconomics, and also macro. And again, I was discussing yesterday that there are all these new papers that are coming out on the effects of tariffs and trade policy, and perhaps a reminder that when we start going medium and long term, technology is not exogenous. There can be changes in technology. So the paper, which we now actually have a version, I have presented this paper when I just tell them that it's a theoretical construct, but now we actually do have a paper. It has the background and use of rare elements, the Chinese rare earth industry policy, empirics, then we go into the model and some counterfactuals, and then the conclusions. So, rare earths, as I said, this part I have found to be a lot of fun, in part due to my ignorance, but again, if you don't remember your periodic table, these are the rare elements here, these ones here. Again, I mention them because depending on your definition, people are also using lithium and some others. Literally, this paper is concentrated on rare earths. And as I said, they have these nice characteristics that make them, I think, interesting on their own and particular. That is, they have broad and diverse applications, they're hard to substitute, they have relatively inelastic supply, and they're highly concentrated. So, as I said, they have very particular applications. I'm not going to go too much into this. We're going to focus in particular on 5 elements. But there's an obsession because of magnets that use ND and DY. And you will see, in fact, now China also explicitly also restricted the magnets and not only the inputs to produce the magnets. They are, as I said, you tend to use very little, but they are very hard to substitute. And in the paper, we're going to use this source that we found. It's a technical scientific document that, using physical and chemical characteristics, ranks how easy it is to substitute these elements in the use of different products. And I'm going to show you how detailed this analysis was done. But here you can see that it gives you an idea of the ones that are more substitute and less substitute. In fact, they actually ranked a lot of the elements. The other characteristic is, as I said, they're not rare. They're just very hard to mine. And thus, in the short run, one can argue that the supply is very inelastic. One reason is that they tend to be a byproduct of mining. So in fact, for a longest time, they were confused. They thought that one element was one element, and then they found out that it was two. So as I said, a lot of them have Greek names, and I won't, since Kostas is here, I won't attempt to pronounce them. But most of the names in Greek have something to do with lying, hidden, really, really hard to get, even harder to get, because again, they have been finding them that they were like close together, and little by little they were finding them. There's something that a lot of them come with one rare element that is TB, I forgot if it's TB or TI, that's actually radioactive. So for the longest time, they thought that all rare elements were radioactive. And that is why it's also very hard to mine, because everything rare elements had a radioactive protocol and the implications of that. Then later, when they split them, they found out that it was one rare element that is radioactive. There is one place that you can find the rare earths that are not combined with that radioactive rare element, and guess where is that place? China. So China, the clays do not have that combination that is radioactive, and so it's very labor intensive, but at least it doesn't have this radioactive protocol. That doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily pollute, but it does have that advantage. So there is a little bit of a comparative advantage that China brought to this story. And then because of lower labor costs, perhaps different protocols to mine, so on and so forth, the outcome is not only that they have a lot of reserves, but they actually do dominate processing. So even until today, processing is concentrated in China. And I actually would argue that it is one of the minerals the most concentrated in terms of production and processing. There's one mineral that is just in Brazil, but people don't tend to know that it's so important, which is this one. But anyways. So this is the policy that we exploit. So for various reasons, China in 2010 started to restrict the export of rare earths. They argue was to combat illegal mining, and when you read documents from the time, it is true that they were having an illegal mining problem. Then there was a diplomatic issue with Japan, some disputes over waters and a boat that collided. The outcome of this is that China unofficially suspended exports to Japan. It's very interesting. There is an article of Krugman at that time where he says, well, the Chinese are telling us that they're not doing anything, but we know for a fact that they're not exporting. Then China just made it explicit, increased the export tax. All throughout this period, there are WTO complaints. I was told that Jim Grossman was the representative on this fight. Then there were more quotas, eventually WTO rules, and then they get rid of the quota. So what we argue about this case is, first, there is a part of this that is exogenous, that it was not the intent to restrict it that much. But the other thing is that what this made clear, that was not clear before, is that they could use rare elements as a policy for diplomatic purposes, if you want. And so after this, the reliability of the supply starts to become in question. Before, you don't find any reference to concerns about the supply of rare elements. After this, it becomes, if you want, a real concern. And that's what we exploit. So these are the effects in terms of prices. And so these are the different events. As you can see, there was a quite dramatic, so we plotted in logs, increase in the price of these rare elements. Now keep in mind that these tend to be very inelastic. So these are not traded like a stock market. So there is a little bit of illiquidity. But you can see the huge jump in prices. And eventually they do come down. Part is also that there was the WTO ruling. But this is the event that we're going to explore. Just to give you a sense, Japan was the main user of rare elements. There is this that complicates our lives a little bit better, just because it is what it is. The global financial crisis happened in the middle. A lot of the use of these rare earths is very procyclical because of the uses. And so you do see there was a little bit of a drop in demand around 2009. That is the global financial crisis. And there was a little bit of going back. But as you can see, before and after 2010, there was a clear change in the imports from China. So clearly after this event, especially the Japanese, started to try to see how they would deal with these supply reliability concerns, and they use different methods. One is this. As I said, before this event, you rarely see rare elements show up in earning calls. So we went and looked at earning calls, and we went and looked at how firms are responding to this. Are they trying to innovate? Are they trying to substitute? Are they trying to produce them on their own? And you do see there's a lot of reaction, but mostly they're trying to find ways to become more efficient in the use of rare elements. They also are trying to find some other sources and some other ways to get around it. The problem is that in the very short run, supply is basically given. And this is just a plot from the US Geological Survey on the changes in reserves. So there was eventually, and now there's a little bit more availability coming from Australia and other countries, but this took a while for many reasons. This is not easy to mine. But even if there was a change in supply, mining, the processing of this is still concentrated in China. So in the short run and medium-term analysis that we're going to do, we're just going to assume that supply is given. That is, as I said, consistent with the evidence. And so we start with an empirical analysis. What we do, let me see, how am I doing? So I'm going too fast. So what we do is we look at the effects of the supply shock on downstream manufacturing sectors. We look at within China and outside China. We look at different outcomes. One is first proxies of a direct technical change. So we look at patents, and we also look at TFP and labor productivity. And we also look at measures of growth in exports of downstream products. To do this, as I said, we're going to combine input-output direct coefficients and a measure of complementarity to look at the intensive use of rare earths in different industries. And we're going to do it in the 50 largest economies. So yes, I dropped Costa Rica.
Do we allow questions?
Yes.
The question is, like, you did mention when you did the countries, you did mention the ocean bed, I guess, right? And a huge deposit of rare earth is like in the ocean, and it's not owned by any country, right? Is this correct from what I understand?
Yes.
And basically, all the in the short run, the supply is very fixed, but even like in the medium run, once prices are high, people will start getting them from
there
the
are
ocean bed,
rare
right?
earths everywhere. Everywhere is full of rare earths. Like they're not rare at all. Like that is just false advertising. The problem is they're very hard to mine, and they're very hard to mine economically. So if you blow up the Rocky Mountains, that's full of rare earths, but you have to blow up the Rocky Mountains. So it turns out that the place that has them, that is relatively economical, is China, because it has a clay. There's some clay that you go and just pick it up and put
But the question is, how do you think about the medium-term equilibrium if there is a trade war and fragmentation? This will change drastically, right? Because
I'm telling you, mining is, there's the processing, but the mining is not trivial at all. It turns out because of this, that they're like stuck together. And so to be able to do it economically, there's a place that still mines in Estonia. And so you have to increase temperatures to 2,000, 3,000 centigrades, and then you get one part. So it splits. Then you have to do it again, and it splits again. So it's very complicated, and after several, you get a very little. So it's, as of right now, it's not economical. But then the other that is interesting, if you want one rare element, the splitting has to be geared towards that one, because if not, you can lose it in the process. So there, as of right now, a lot of restrictions that make this not economical at all. But they are not rare. They're everywhere. To the point that after 2010, there was this attempt to start mining somewhere else, and look how long it took. I mean, it is known that they're everywhere. But still, they have to find places that are a little bit more economical.
But I guess the big question is, like, it looks very inelastic right now in the given equilibrium. But the equilibrium changes a little bit, prices double or quadruple, and suddenly things become very elastic, right? That's a possibility for this market, I guess.
I'm telling you that from 2010 till now, it didn't happen. It didn't happen.
We're in one equilibrium, but we might be shifting to a new one, and things might look very different.
Yes.
So I don't need to
No. So and there's a lot of effort. So for example, they have been trying to open another processing in Canada. They finally did it, but it has taken a long time. The other thing that makes this not so easy is that they're mixed with this radioactive. So if you want to blow up the ocean, that's fine, but you need to have a process not to pollute the whole ocean with radioactive. And this is why it became so interesting. Like, you end up then going deep into chemistry. But this that is with the radioactive is one of the reasons that is also a little bit complicated. Anyways. So how do we go about creating this input-output? So as I said, you cannot find it in most input-output. It's just not there. It's not disaggregated enough. So what we did is we found a geological survey of 2010 that describes downstream applications and the amount that is needed. So for us, this was actually very lucky because it's around 2010, which is 2013, which is around the time that we did. So to your point, if we want to do it again, I would try to find something a little bit more outdated, because it is true that in 15 years there has been a lot of innovation. But this one was written around 2010, and that is the one that we're going to use. We're also going to use Asian metals and industry reports. We found that these industry reports are all written by someone who used to be a national security person who later started a consulting firm. And once you go deep into his reports, you never really find a reference. So you don't know how. And so that's why we started with the US GS, that at least there's some reference on where a lot of the information is coming. So how are we thinking about this? So there is the extraction, that is that, blowing up the Rocky Mountains or your preferred location. Then there is the processing. So this is dominated by China, this is dominated by China, and we don't have information. I have told this story, so the way we thought we would approach this is, I do know the firm that has processing and mining inside China and outside China. And so I picked up the phone and I'm like, hi, how are you? Do you want to write a case? And then you tell me all about this information. Just to have the first round of information from them, I had to sign an ND. So they don't share. So done. That's it. There's no other company outside. And the Chinese are not going to tell me. So this is very hard to get a lot of details. So this is the part that we're going to focus, and that is what we found in this document. So it is about these end uses, but the end uses are many intermediate products. It's the magnets, the batteries, catalysts. And so this paper, which is what we found, it tells me, okay, for zinc-based coating for light gauge steel products, which of course we all know what that is, You use 5.6, I think this was units, I forgot if it's metric tons, but it's a unit of cerium oxide. So it goes into detail, hybrids, catalysts, and it goes into detail into each, how much they use, and that is what we're using as our input-output. And as I said, it's around the time of our event, so the technology picks up the use there. And this is important because there was a lot of use of rare earths in lamps, and the LED lamps have changed that a lot. So when you use earning calls, there's an obsession what's going to happen to lamps, and then all of a sudden lamps disappear because there was an innovation in the way we do lamps. Who knew? Anyways. So then we take that, and then we have to match it with NICE codes and then to HS codes, and then we have to just figure out a little bit how to match these things that just requires going to the classifications and using a little bit of our view of where things go, and we get our input-output. Again, most of these numbers are very small. You really, this is like salt. You use a little bit of salt, but if you don't use the salt, you have problems. I shouldn't use cooking examples because I don't cook. So then we went to the patent data. And again, there's different forms of innovation, but patent would be the one that Alisa's give us a way to check this. It's fairly easy to check for elements in patents, so we just checked for elements. And then we did a second round of finding out what these patents are doing for these different innovations, if they're improving, if they're making more efficient, and I'll show you some examples. But this is what we get when we classify them by if you want, downstream products. You do see here, it does take a while because patents do take a while, but you do see an increase in the patenting. Just to give you an example of what we find. So for example, this is GM Global Technology. Look how fairly quickly they file. So they filed in 2011. And it was granted in 2013. And they go, it's interesting that many do say that the problem is that they had to invent a way because it was just too expensive. And a lot of the patents have say something along these lines. This is the same patent. We blew it up a little bit for you to see, and they do mention it was due to cost problems. This is another, also filed fairly quickly, approved in April 2014, and it also mentions the problem that is associated with that the supply is very restrictive. By the way, there is an interesting parallel because the ND magnet was invented because the other magnet uses inputs that come from Congo, and there was a civil war in Congo, and it was very expensive, and so they had to find a way to deal with that, and they invented this. And as I said, we have many examples of this type of things. Let me go back and not show you all of the. But now in the paper we put many examples, and again, what we found to be interesting is this, that they cite the increase in prices as a reason to, which is that event, as a reason to innovate.
So now, just to make sure, so these are patents that aim to replace technologies that rely a lot on rare earths.
To make the use of rare earths more efficient. So I'm going to give you the best example. So it turns out you had this ND magnet that uses, they found out that you only needed to quote it, to put an outer quoting of ND, and they found out then it uses less ND and is more potent. So these are the things that they found that made it more efficient. And there are many like that. So there's some that substituted completely. So they found some other thing too. But now you understand why this has taken a little bit of a time. In part also it's because every route becomes very interesting and also opens up all this world of things we don't know. So we have been like going into construction sites and looking at things. Because they are actually have many uses. So this is what we do. So we try to find out how does economic activity change differently before after the shock in sectors that are more or less sensitive to the use of rare earths. And so, as I said, we use different outcomes. We look at innovation, we use productivity, we use downstream exports. We're using it in sector S, different regions during time T. So we use this treatment intensity, and I'll explain it in a second. We use different controls and different fixed effects. We have some controls for demand, and we also have some controls for potential policy associated with the rare earths. So this measure of sensitivity, so it is the input-output coefficient, how important that element is in the production of the input, times this complementarity index that comes from the paper that I showed you. And so if this element is very substitutable, it doesn't matter, you use something else. If it's not very substitutable, which would be 100, then this shock particularly affects you. So the shock particularly affects you if it's very important in production and if you cannot substitute. And just to give you an idea of how detailed this is, so this is what these guys do. So they went glass polishing applicator. Use of polishing precision optics. What is the percentage that you use? 25%. Can you find some substitute? Yes, and they rank it. And so they go product at this level, what is the input that they're using of different elements, lanthanum, so on and so forth. They write how substitutable it can be. And so this is the index that we use. So it's a physical chemical index. It's not per se economical, but we also use proxies of prices and previous use. But again, it's a very technical, if you want, substitution. And again, this is 215, published in 2015. So it does reflect that technology at the time. This technology has changed, and so this is the one that we use. And so this is our evidence in terms of enhancing the patents that make the use of rare earths more efficient. Again, there can be the substitution away to previous technologies, so you can go back to use the previous type of magnets that don't use rare earths. That's also a way to deal with this, but here we're just looking at the patents that made it more efficient. And as you can see, we find evidence that there was significant innovation in the sectors that are particularly sensitive to the use of rare earths. We find that outside China, and then we find it in the US, Europe, Japan. Again, there was this growth of patenting in this sector, and we use different controls to deal with potential concerns. We then look at proxies of productivity growth. For the US, we use the NBR data. For Japan, we went and looked at their local sources. For the other countries, we use UNIDO. And we do find evidence that there was an increase in productivity in most countries except China. So in China, there was no increase in productivity, but in other countries, they became more productive. In the paper, we show also a little bit of labor productivity. And then we look at exports of downstream products. So again, it's not the processing and the mining, but the things that use rare earths. So it is the catalyst, it's the magnets, and so on and so forth. And we find that there was an increase in the exports of products that use these rare earths intensively. And we find that it's everywhere. Not in the US, but the US doesn't do a lot of manufacturing. So, I mean, it is positive, but not significant. And we find no evidence in China. We also do it relative to China just in case. And again, we do find this evidence that there was an increase in the export of downstream products that use rare earths. So we find increased patents increased innovation, increased productivity, and higher exports in downstream sectors that were impacted by this China rare earth supply shock, relative to the sectors that were not impacted. Yes?
So are there export restrictions promoting innovation in the downstream?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a message?
Mm-hmm.
But what about the other innovations that might have happened when there is more access to rare earth? So these are innovations that try to make it more efficient to get around the export restrictions. But is there a trade-off of restricted rare earth exports that, some innovations, some other innovations might have declined?
So because of that, we control for the total stock of patents. We actually do a subsample of that. So there is a control for that. But at the level that you're saying, we would need to think a little bit more complicated how to do it. But we do control for the stock of patents.
For those downstream products? Or
In general. Yeah, in general. It's a sample, because we cannot. So we do a sample of the stock of patents, and we include it, because that has been a concern. But again, the identification comes from the sectors that relatively use them more relative to the sectors that relatively use them less.
I don't have identification concern. This is not identification concern. It's more about curiosity about what happens to the other innovations. Because this is a strong message, right? Restricting exports of rare earth, you are actually getting more innovation. But it is one specific type of innovation.
Yes, but I also think that there are examples from history that this happens. So there is the example of the cotton in the blockade that got more innovation in cotton. And it does tend to be focused on the thing that you're blocking. Oil, there was the oil block, and then the Japanese made everything more efficient. I actually do think that there is something focused on about that. And you're right, there has been the concern that if you block semiconductors to China, the only thing that you're going to get is that the Chinese are going to have better semiconductors. I think yesterday someone used the phrase, necessity is the mother of all inventions. I think it was you. So it is a little bit that. And because this sector is at the frontier of knowledge, I think, or we believe that is very fertile for, if you put a lot of scientists, they're going to get something, which, by the way, is what the Japanese did. The Japanese were very Japanese about this. They called everyone, okay, who has it, who doesn't have it, who stockpile. They try to stockpile, but there's something about stockpiling when there's a lot of uncertainty, you cannot really use it because then you run out of it. And then who's working on this? And they pushed. As I said, there's a previous example when the cobalt magnet, they had to get out of cobalt magnet because of the problems in Congo. Cobalt was so expensive that it was just economically not usable. By the way, these regressions, we also use the price spikes as a robustness, and we also use the import shares as a robustness. We sort of like this one because it's very technical. It's physics and chemistry. So then we try to make a little bit sense of these results. And for that, we use Asimoglu's Nobel Prize winner paper on direct technological change, meeting Lorenzo's work, and my co-authors have some other work, and someone should tell Lorenzo that they're getting cited a lot in this conference. So the features we want these downstream sectors, we want trade, and we want directed technical change. So think that we have this tradable sector, the Japanese electric cars, which, by the way, at the time we were studying, that was the thing that used the most rare earths. It was the Prius. Another factoid, if you go and compare the Prius in 2010 relative to the Prius today, it uses less rare earths. Just to give you a sense of the innovation. What tended to happen is that the use of each magnet now uses less, but we invented more uses of the magnet. So now the volume of magnets has grown a lot, but each magnet uses less. But the Prius overall, they have come up with a Prius that uses less magnets. So think about these electrical vehicles is produced under perfect competition with 2 input bundles that are going to be the rare earth and labor. We just use 2 to make our lives easier. We abstract from capital. Each is going to be produced with endogenous measures of technology, and they're going to be imperfect substitute. So these are the endogenous research efforts that we're going to keep track of. So we came up with this representation to try to give a summary of the model. So we combine labor inputs and rare earths that have some elasticity of substitution in the production of these country sector level goods that are tradables. We bundle them in these Hamilton bundles, and they're finally used in consumption or to pay the fixed costs to be able to innovate and get more knowledge patents. So this, if you want a little bit of the summary of the model, and then
what's the what's
the labor and rare earths. So this is the use of so products combine labor and rare earths. I can innovate and make labor better. I can innovate and make rare earths better. And there's a fixed cost of innovation. So yes, L is the patents in labor, and R are the patents in rare earths. And so then this is just, again, the model. There is the labor input, the rare earth input, and there is the intensity of the use of labor and rare earths, and there is a substitution between labor and rare earths. We're going to have the innovation sector, that is the traditional innovation sector. You're going to have firms in monopolistic competition that are going to invent their new variety. We're assuming that knowledge stays within a country, so we're not assuming externalities across countries. The summation of all these monopolistic competition firms is going to give you the state of technology, and there's free entry in innovation. And so we keep track of these A and AR and AL, that is sort of like the knowledge, the patent, the stock of patents, or the stock of knowledge in the production of rare earths and labor. Then, as I said, there is your final consumption, and also I can use the final good to pay for these fixed costs. We assume that labor markets clear within countries. So the only thing that can be traded are these goods, and the only one who has rare earths is China. And China can restrict rare earths. And so in these traditional models, what you tend to have is that if there is an increase in the cost of rare earths, so the relative demand of rare earths is going to fall. Did we manage to make this work or no? No. So if I make rare earths more expensive, the relative demand is going to fall, and there will be endogenous change depending on the parameters. So if I have the right substitution, then the revenue is going to make it worthwhile for the firms to invest in innovation, and I'm going to get higher innovation. And again, this is the standard that comes from the Acemoglu models. Again, is I get a reduction, an increase in the costs, depending on the right level of parameters. I can get enough innovation that at the end I use more of these products. And so the question is how to estimate these elasticities. So if we had some form of expenditure shares, we could calculate it. And believe me, we have tried to get expenditure shares, but you don't get expenditure shares on rare earths. I have gone deep into the balance sheet of Toyota, and I have harassed every executive that has come. The problem is that the scientists there is what you pay for scientists. But unless you know someone inside that will tell you, it's very hard to know the scientist that is assigned to this product. And so, and that is the level that you need, and I can't. We have not been able to find it. And even if I were able to find it for Toyota, there are these other companies that I will never get it for. And believe me, we have gone deep into balance sheets to find a way, but it's just too aggregated to be able to. But if you stare enough at this formula and you take logs, then you can try to get an estimate if you use this stock of patents, if you want, as a relative changing knowledge. And that's what we use. So we're going to use these relative changing patents to be able to get estimates on this elasticity of substitution. And we're going to do it for different assumptions of mu. We do get that the elasticity of substitution is less than 1, which is what you need for the technical change to go in the right way. So we do get that these are gross complements. And that will generate the correct increase in technological change. And this is what we do in terms of the estimates. So as I said, in terms of intensity, the use is very little, and that we expected. And we do get that for most of them, the elasticity is less than 1. For some, it's greater than 1. Like, I'm not shocked that in textiles is greater than 1. But again, these are the estimates that we get on elasticity, and that is what we're going to feed now into the model. We add additional calibrating parameters. So we're doing it for 5 regions. We're using different values of elasticity. So we have this parameter that is sort of like a negative externality that is trying to pick up that if we all try to go for the same scientists, we're going to beat up the price of the scientists, and that is going to slow down innovation. So this is just to slow down some of the change and actually makes it also worthwhile a little bit of entry. And we estimate from the value added some of the shares that I showed you. And so this is some of the counterfactuals that we're running that are consistent with the empirical mechanisms that we find. So we simulate 100% increase in tax. We do get that there is more patents, positive innovation in the rest of the world, not in China. We do get positive TFP outside China, not in China. And we do get an increase in revenue that is what we need to be able to trigger enough innovation. We compare with a model without technological change, and in a model of technological change, you just wouldn't see that. What you get is that there wouldn't be TFP, and there wouldn't be enough innovation, and so we're assuming that there's no technology, so that would be the change. So again, the changes are consistent with the mechanisms that we find. We have found that this model is very nonlinear, and so that has taken a little bit of a while, but we finally have the model running. We want to do a little bit more counterfactuals, but again, this is consistent with the evidence. And so to conclude, we look at the shock. The shock led to the expansion in downstream industries. So necessity is the mother of all invention. And so the conclusion is one does need to be careful when trying to extrapolate the effects of policy, for sure, in the medium and long run. But any policy can have unintended consequences because humankind will do what humankind does, try to find a way out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very nice, Laura. Thanks for the presentation. I just want to point out there is a paper by Weis Yang. He's at Michigan, and he has like a similar. He does environmental restriction, but he has a similar kind of story where environmental restrictions lead to direct technical change, but it's not in sectors. It's like how it's at the firm level. So there's kind of a nice analogy.
Yeah, so we have some of, there's a lot in the environmental, but if you give me the citation, we will add it because we're finally ready to produce a working paper. And I know your paper, I don't know if you updated it. Can you please send it again? Because literally now we're finally going to be able to produce a working paper.
Actually, can I follow up?
Yeah, just a question while she gets you the microphone. Actually, I wanted to follow up on Maggie, because I think it's true that a nice, let's say, companion paper could be what's the innovation that, what's the innovation when you actually open up, so it's more at the extensive margin, and it's a completely different setup, but it's definitely the complementary question, right? You have the microphone.
Yeah, I really like the presentation, and I wanted to give you one more example of necessity is the mother of invention, which is the lithium batteries versus nickel batteries. So nickel is very heavy, difficult to produce, difficult to mine, and difficult to transport. So the EV industries is moving towards lithium batteries. So now I just Google, the majority of the EVs are actually using lithium batteries rather than nickel, because nickel is just more difficult. So that addresses.
But lithium batteries have a problem that nickel doesn't have.
The boom, yeah.
Yes.
So wait for a few years.
No, I know. Yeah, and in a couple of years they're gonna fix that.
All very good example supporting your conclusions.
Other questions?
I guess, following up on this question about different types of innovation. So if you're focusing on the efficiency innovation, if you think about the like the Acemoglu, Emu et al. Paper looking at directed technical innovation in the automobile industry. So they distinguish between dirty and clean innovation, and so are looking for at substitution across types of innovation. So and you can think of, like, in case of if energy prices go up, you invest in energy saving technologies. You also invest in technologies that don't need so much energy, and you reduce innovation in internal combustion engine, and maybe more in batteries, et cetera. So it can be difficult to categorize sort of brown, gray, and green innovations. And so I guess the question here is if you're focusing too squarely on energy, rare earth saving innovation, how do you quantify sort of the change? I mean, the changes in innovation in other.
So just to be clear, the way we did this is we first look for all patents that are about rare earths. So we have a regression that looks at all patents that mention rare earths.
But shouldn't it be at all patents?
Wait, and then we felt that was too general. And so we went and looked at patents that are about using it more efficiently. And that's the regression that we use.
I guess so. The question would be, what if you looked at all patents related to the technologies that use rare earth and distinguish between those that are focused on the rare earth component of those technologies versus like innovating in overall innovation in the.
That's what we do. So we have catalysts, batteries, magnets. So these are the uses. And we go and find within this use, give me all the patents that have rare earths. And once we have that, I'm like, can you now tell me of those ones what are more efficient?
Okay. I guess I'm curious about what happens to the patenting related to the using technologies that aren't related to rare earths.
Which is Maggie's question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. We didn't check.
I just have one small technical question. When you're in one of the last steps, you're estimating the elasticity using the change in the patterns and as the left-hand side. Is that, and then you're saying that like the model predicts the increase in innovation, and in some sense that's the consequence of using the change in the patterns as opposed to.
I don't know. I don't know if this would have given me this elasticity less than 1.
Yeah, but if you use some more direct measure on the left-hand side and then use the model to simulate the changes in innovation, that would be like a more direct validation as opposed to estimating the parameter that predicts the increase in the patterns.
Sorry? So we use this to estimate this elasticity?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and since the patterns increase over time, which is an increase in innovation, the elasticity is consistent with the model prediction.
That's what I'm saying. It's not clear to me, and that's not the case, that the change in the patterns always gives me less than 1. It didn't.
Oh, okay. So you're saying like when you're like aggregating it, or?
Yeah.
I see.
Other questions? Great. Then we continue over lunch. Reconvene at 1:30 in 1 hour.
Thanks.